They say loneliness can make you do things you never imagined, and I suppose that's why I'm sitting here now, bearing my soul. My name is Dana, and I've been a widow for 7 years. After my husband passed, the quiet nights stretched into endless years, each one lonelier than the last. I'd always been the type to follow the rules, but grief has a way of breaking you down, leaving cracks where temptation seeps in. Last summer, I decided to visit my old friend Yvonne in Atlanta. We hadn't seen each other in years, but she'd always been there for me during the hard times. Yvonne had this warm, nurturing energy that reminded me of better days. What I didn't know was that this visit would change my life in ways I could never have predicted. The moment I arrived at Yvonne's house, the heat of the southern sun wasn't the only thing that left me breathless. Standing in the driveway, shirtless and glistening with sweat, was Marcus, her 25-year-old son. He wasn't the lanky boy I remembered from the last time I visited. No, Marcus had grown into a man. His athletic frame was impossible to ignore. Broad shoulders, taut muscles, and a smile that could light up a room. I felt a twinge of guilt just looking at him, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. Dana, Yvonne's voice snapped me out of my thoughts. She came bustling out of the house, arms wide open, ready to embrace me. I hugged her tightly, grateful for the distraction, but as we walked into the house, I felt Marcus's eyes linger on me. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but it sent a jolt through me. That evening, we all sat down for dinner. Yvonne talked about her work, her church group, and her plans for a community fundraiser. I nodded along, but my focus kept drifting to Marcus. He was sitting across from me, his dark eyes locking with mine every so often. "You've been awfully quiet tonight," Yvonne said, pulling me back into the conversation. I smiled and shook my head. Just tired from the drive. That's all. But the truth was, I wasn't tired. I was conflicted. I knew I had no business feeling this way about my friend's son, but something about him drew me in. After dinner, Yvonne excused herself to make a few phone calls. Marcus stayed behind to help me clear the table. The kitchen was small, and as we moved around each other, the space between us seemed to shrink. "You look good, Miss Dana," he said, his voice low and smooth. I froze for a moment, caught off guard. "Thank you, Marcus. You've grown up a lot since I last saw you." He smiled, a slow, deliberate grin that made my pulse quicken. I guess we both changed over the years. Before I could respond, Yvonne called out from the other room, breaking the spell. I hurried upstairs to the guest bedroom, my heart racing. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about Marcus. His confidence, his presence, it awakened something in me that I hadn't felt in years. But with that awakening came guilt. How could I even entertain these thoughts? He was Yvonne's son, for God's sake. The next morning, I decided to shake off the feeling and focus on my visit. As I came downstairs, I found Marcus tying his running shoes. "Morning," he said, flashing that same disarming smile. "I'm heading out for a jog. Care to join me?" I hesitated, searching for an excuse, but before I could find one, he added, "It's a beautiful day. Might be good to get some fresh air." Against my better judgment, I agreed. As we ran through the neighborhood, I tried to focus on the rhythm of my breathing and the scenery around us. But every time I glanced at Marcus, my thoughts betrayed me. He was patient, slowing his pace to match mine, and when I stumbled on an uneven patch of sidewalk, his strong hands caught me before I could fall. "You okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. I nodded, embarrassed but secretly thrilled by his touch. By the time we returned to the house, my resolve was already beginning to crumble. I told myself it was harmless, a fleeting attraction that would fade with time. But deep down, I knew better. As I climbed the stairs to shower, I felt Marcus's eyes on me again, and this time, I didn't try to ignore it. If you're as drawn into this story as I was living it, don't forget to like and subscribe for more dramatic and heartfelt tales. It was supposed to be an innocent jog. That's what I told myself as I laced up my sneakers the next morning, trying to ignore the flutter in my stomach. Marcus was already waiting for me at the front door, leaning casually against the frame, his athletic build more pronounced in the early sunlight. "Ready?" he asked, flashing that confident smile. I nodded, trying to appear unfazed. Let's do this. The morning air was crisp, but it did little to cool the heat rising in me as we jogged side by side. Marcus was surprisingly easy to talk to, funny, insightful, and far more mature than his 25 years should allow. He asked about my life, my work, and my late husband with a genuine interest that caught me off guard. You must miss him a lot, he said gently, slowing his pace to match mine. I hesitated, unsure how to respond. I do, I admitted, my voice soft. But life goes on, doesn't it? Marcus nodded, his dark eyes searching mine. It does. But that doesn't mean you have to go through it alone. His words lingered in the air between us, heavy with meaning. I looked away, pretending to focus on the path ahead, but my mind was racing. Was he implying something, or was I reading too much into it? The trail led us to a secluded park, a quiet spot surrounded by tall trees and blooming flowers. Marcus suggested we take a break, and I agreed, grateful for the chance to catch my breath. We sat on a wooden bench, the silence between us comfortable yet charged. You're stronger than you think, Marcus said suddenly, his voice low. I turned to him, confused. What do you mean? You've been through so much, but here you are, still standing, still living. That's strength. Something in his tone, in the way he looked at me, made my heart skip a beat. Thank you, I murmured, unsure of what else to say. Then it happened. He reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair from my face. The gesture was so intimate, so unexpected, that I froze. You deserve to feel alive again, he said softly, his face inches from mine. And just like that, the world seemed to stop. I knew I should pull away, should remind him of the boundaries that existed between us. But I didn't. Before I could second-guess myself, his lips were on mine. The kiss was gentle at first, hesitant, as if he was testing the waters. But when I didn't pull away, it deepened, igniting something in me that I thought had died with my husband. When we finally broke apart, I couldn't bring myself to meet his gaze. Marcus, this is wrong, I whispered, my voice trembling. Is it? He asked, his tone challenging. Or are we just afraid of what it means? I didn't have an answer for him. All I knew was that my heart was racing, my mind a whirlwind of guilt and desire. We walked back to the house in silence, the tension between us palpable. I avoided Yvonne's gaze as we entered, afraid she'd see the truth written all over my face. That night, as I lay in bed, the memory of that kiss played over and over in my mind. I knew I should put an end to whatever was happening between us, but the thought of doing so filled me with an ache I couldn't explain.
I told myself it was just a moment of weakness, a slip that wouldn't happen again. But deep down I knew better. Marcus had awakened something in me, something I wasn't ready to let go of. Like and subscribe to stay tuned, because this story is only just beginning, and things are about to spiral out of control. I should have left that morning, packed my things, hugged Yvonne goodbye, and gone back to my quiet, predictable life. But I didn't. Instead, I found myself lingering at her house, making excuses to stay just one more day. The truth was, I couldn't stay away from Marcus. I told myself it was harmless, that it wasn't unusual for an old friend to spend extra time catching up. But every stolen glance, every accidental touch, and every lingering moment alone with Marcus told me otherwise. A few days after that first kiss, Yvonne asked me to help her with preparations for a church fundraiser. Marcus offered to drive me to the store for supplies, and Yvonne, oblivious to the storm brewing under her roof, happily agreed. The ride was quiet at first, the tension between us thick enough to cut with a knife. Are we going to talk about what happened? Marcus finally asked, breaking the silence. I stared out the window, avoiding his gaze. There's nothing to talk about. It was a mistake. A mistake. He let out a bitter laugh. It didn't feel like a mistake to me. I turned to him then, my voice sharp. You're Yvonne's son, Marcus. Do you have any idea how wrong this is? I know exactly how it looks, he said, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. But I also know what I feel. And I know you feel it too. His words sent a chill down my spine. I wanted to argue to deny it, but the truth was written all over my face. At the store, we kept our distance, careful not to draw any unwanted attention. But on the way back, Marcus pulled into a quiet parking lot and killed the engine. "What are you doing?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "I just need to know," he said, turning to face me. "Is this really over, or are you just scared?" His honesty left me speechless. The weight of my guilt was crushing, but so was the pull I felt toward him. Before I could think better of it, I leaned in and kissed him. This time there was no hesitation, no holding back. His hands tangled in my hair as mine clutched the front of his shirt. For those brief moments, the world outside the car didn't exist. When we finally broke apart, I whispered, "This has to stay between us." "It will," he promised, his voice steady. "I won't say a word." But secrecy came with its own set of challenges. I found myself visiting Yvonne more often, under the guise of helping her with her projects. Each visit gave Marcus and me more opportunities to steal away together, our encounters growing bolder and more passionate. One afternoon, while Yvonne was in the garden, Marcus and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen. The tension between us had been building all day, and when he pressed me against the counter and kissed me, I didn't resist. But just as things were heating up, we heard Yvonne's voice calling from the backyard. "Dana, can you bring me the pruning shears?" My heart nearly stopped as I shoved Marcus away, smoothing my hair and adjusting my blouse. He grinned, clearly amused by my panic, but I shot him a glare that quickly wiped the smirk off his face. By the time I stepped outside, pruning shears in hand, I was trembling. Yvonne didn't seem to notice anything unusual, but the close call was enough to leave me rattled. As the days turned into weeks, the guilt became harder to ignore. Yvonne was my closest friend, the one person who had always been there for me. And yet, I was betraying her in the worst possible way. I told Marcus we needed to stop, that we couldn't keep sneaking around. But every time I tried to end it, he'd look at me with those piercing eyes, and all my resolve would crumble. "You make me feel alive," he said one night, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't take that away from me." The truth was, he made me feel alive too. And that terrified me. Guilt had become my constant companion. Every stolen moment with Marcus, every lie I told to Yvonne, felt like a weight pressing down on me. But despite the shame, I couldn't bring myself to stop. The affair had taken on a life of its own, pulling me deeper into a web of lies and desire. Marcus and I became experts at sneaking around. Quick glances during family dinners, whispered conversations when no one was looking, and stolen kisses behind closed doors. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and ours was no exception. It was a Saturday evening when everything unraveled. Yvonne had invited a few friends over for a casual barbecue. The air was thick with the smell of grilled meat and laughter, but I couldn't enjoy it. My nerves were on edge, and Marcus's presence only made things worse. He was there, effortlessly charming as always, chatting with everyone like nothing was out of the ordinary. But every time our eyes met, I felt like the world could see right through us. "Dana, can you grab some more ice from the kitchen?" Yvonne asked, handing me a bowl. I nodded quickly, grateful for the excuse to escape. As I filled the bowl with ice, Marcus appeared in the doorway. My heart leapt into my throat as he closed the door behind him. "What are you doing?" I hissed, glancing toward the window to make sure no one was watching. "I couldn't help myself," he said, his voice low and teasing. "You've been avoiding me all night." "Marcus, this isn't the time," I whispered, my hands trembling. But he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "When is it ever the time, Dana? You keep running and I keep chasing." His words sent a shiver down my spine. Before I could respond, his lips were on mine, desperate and hungry. For a moment, I let myself get lost in him, forgetting where we were and what was at stake. Then the door swung open. "Dana." Yvonne's voice was sharp, her eyes wide as she took in the scene before her. The bowl of ice slipped from my hands, crashing to the floor. "Yvonne," I stammered, my mind racing for an explanation. But the look on her face said it all. She didn't need me to explain. "How could you?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and betrayal. "Yvonne, it's not what it looks like," Marcus began. But she cut him off with a glare that could have frozen fire. "Not what it looks like," she repeated, her voice rising. "I trusted you, Dana. You were like a sister to me. And you," she turned to Marcus, her voice breaking. "You're my son. How could you do this to me?" I couldn't meet her eyes, the weight of her disappointment crushing me. "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I never meant for this to happen." But my apology meant nothing. The damage was done. Yvonne stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Marcus looked at me, his face filled with regret. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice barely audible. I shook my head, unable to answer. I had destroyed the most important friendship of my life, all for a love I didn't know how to define. The days that followed were a blur. Yvonne refused to speak to me, and Marcus was sent to stay with relatives out of state. The house that had once been a sanctuary was now a prison of shame and regret. I packed my things and left without saying goodbye. I didn't have the right. Now, sitting here and recounting it all, I realize how much I've lost. Yvonne, the only true friend I had, and Marcus, the man who made me feel alive again. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself for what I did. But maybe sharing my story will help someone else avoid the mistakes I made. If this story gripped you, please like and subscribe for more raw, emotional tales of love and redemption. Thank you for watching.